Welcome one and welcome all to the first episode of the Brew Breakdown. Today we are going to be going over a spicy blue-black Reanimator list that I've put together. In this video, we're going to go over the list on a card-by-card basis in order to break down exactly what this incredibly fun deck is made of. I have a second video up that covers the gameplay of the list, so make sure to check that one out as well, link down in the description. So without further nonsense, let's get right to the meat and potatoes we have here. Let's start by taking a look at the reanimation tools that we have present here, starting with the inspiration for the deck, Isareth the Awakener. So I designed the entire list around this cute little card. Initially I looked at it and decided, well, that's kind of shitty, isn't it? But upon being exposed to this in Limited, I changed my mind to holy fuck nuts, this is a very good card. A 3-3 with Death Touch for 3 mana is not a bad base to start with by any stretch of the imagination, and couple that with being able to reanimate things, especially stuff like your cheap enablers, in order to continue filling your yard and digging for your reanimation payoffs, and what you end up with is a very solid creature on your hands here. For instance, we are running 14 1 and 2 CMC creatures, which become very easy to whip back even during the early game, since the cost to reanimate something is that creature's converted mana cost. This is an ability that allows us to do shit and make plays without actually using the cards that we have in our hand, and that is always something that is beneficial no matter what deck you are playing. Adding to that, the fact that she has Death Touch helps to ensure that when you are attacking with her in order to trigger this reanimation effect, that she will either survive the combat by them neglecting to block her, or at the very least she will be taking something on their board with her. We are also running 5 sources of removal stapled to creatures in the forms of Ravenous Chupacabra and Dream Eater, so whipping back one of these allows you to clear a path either to ensure her survival or to create an awkward time for our opponent when they are choosing their blockers. She is all around a very versatile creature. So the other main helping of spicy sauce that we have here comes in the form of Lazav the Multifarious. While being an early graveyard enabler that can also come back for only 2 mana with the help of Isareth, his second ability just brings so much tech and so much synergy to this table that, quite frankly, it's astounding. I'm going to go over some of these little pieces of tech and fun little interactions as I go, and as I do, please keep in mind that this second ability here is activatable at instant speed, which is what makes it the nuts. I've chosen to only run 3 copies of both him and Isareth based on the fact that they're both legendary creatures. Otherwise, both of these cards would be 4-ofs, especially Lazav. And because he is only 2 CMC, I am still thinking of making a cut to add the 4th of him, but I need to do more testing in order to make that call. So rounding out our reanimators is 2 copies of this fun guy here, Connive Concoct, and 2 copies of the pretty well known at this point Eldest Reborn. While both of these spells cost 5 mana, which is slightly over the ideal, what I like about them is how they both bring some form of utility or upside to the table outside of just reanimate some big fat idiot. The Eldest Reborn here grants us a bit of disruption with its sack and its discard effect, and can also target creatures in our opponent's graveyard, which is a nice little upside, while Concoct has the upside of having Connive attached to it, which can be surprisingly good. For instance, I have used this to steal things like Aurelia before, which always feels very good. And it can also be used to, for instance, take one of their blockers in order for us to push through lethal damage. Essentially, it could be used as a removal spell in a pinch. Concoct itself also acts as an enabler, as well with the whole Surveil 3 part that it has going on. Of course, the Surveil happens before the reanimation does, which means if you surveil a creature into the graveyard, you are able to then reanimate that with the same spell, which is very fucking nice. So, now that we know what we'll be using to whip back our dudes, let's talk about how we're going to get these fat boys into the yard for that to happen. First and foremost, we have the fucking Pablo Sanchez of the deck. I'm talking about Stitcher's Supplier. Let's just talk real talk for a moment here. If you read this card when it was debuted and didn't immediately drop Trow in order to begin the masturbation process, then that was most likely because you were too busy projectile vomiting onto the Mythic spoiler page out of sheer disgust at this monster's power level. For the 1% of you out there who don't fully comprehend why this thing is busted, I'd like to draw your attention to the top right hand corner of the card right about here, where you will see a singular black skull symbol. This card puts 7 cards into your graveyard for 1 mana. That's 1 mana. I will say it again, it's 1 fucking mana. It fills your graveyard and then it fills it again, and what more, this thing also saves you damage by being an excellent chump blocker. As if this card needed any more justification for being a 4 of. Like I said earlier, Isareth can reanimate it for, gonna say this one more goddamn time, 1 mana, and even Lazav can become a copy of it for 1 in response to a kill spell in order to get that death trigger on him now to put 3 more cards in the yard. Stitcher's Supplier is a beautiful abomination that should not have been printed, but I am incredibly happy that it was. Now, there's no appropriate follow-up, and nothing else is going to live up to or even come close to how incredible Stitcher's Supplier is. But our next 4 of here is Seeker's Squire. I'm going to get it out of the way now. This card is the most meh card available. Last format, the only decks that I played were Godpharaoh's Gift decks. And I just loved that card and the whole archetype, so I was often forced to play Seeker's Squire as an enabler because there weren't really any better options, and that is the same case here. Now, I'm not going to shit all over this card because it isn't a bad card by any stretch of the imagination. It is just, as I said, meh. Seeker's Squire, she comes to work, she does her job, and she goes home. She's an average employee who can always be encountered to show up to work. 2 mana for a body and an explore trigger is good. A 2/3 for 2 is a decent body for that price. And it also helps to enable our graveyard, and it smooths out our draws by drawing us lands. So we run 4 of them because consistency in Magic the Gathering is a very good thing. To finish up going over our enablers, we have 2 slices of Search for Azcanta. Now, if you have been playing Magic at all since Ixalan was released, you have encountered this card, you know what it does, and you know that it does that thing incredibly well. But in this deck, I usually just have it sit there on the board and be a Thassa that fills up the graveyard rather than flipping it to the land side. I do this because the deck doesn't actually run a ton of non-creature spells. In fact, it only runs 10. None of these 10 being hard removal or counter spells, which are usually the things that you will be digging for when activating Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. So the only time that I actually flip it is when I need to tap the land side for mana, or if I have the second Search in hand, because Search is a legendary card. Now it is worth mentioning that one of the strongest plays in the deck is turn 1 Stitcher's Supplier into turn 2 Search for Azcanta. That actually can help you ramp in your blue-black deck, which is something that I find funny and also incredible at the same time. Fuck Search for Azcanta, this card is fucking stupid. Now, let's move on to the reason why we play Reanimator decks, that being the payoffs. Now, in a typical Reanimator deck, you're going to be looking to reanimate something like this, or something like this, or even sometimes something like this stupid piece of fucking shit that should have never been printed, Wizards of the Coast. But this deck does not exactly function like that. Remember, this deck was built around Isareth the Awakener, which means the majority of what we're going to be working with here is actually hard-castable quite frequently, unlike the examples that I just showed. This is nice because it allows you to have a mid-range game plan rather than a fragile combo game plan, which usually doesn't hold up super well in Standard. Now, the first of these payoffs is Doom Whisperer. Let's cut right to it. Doom Guy is fucking awesome. Here we have a 6/6 Flampler for 5 that has the stupidest, most busted, dumb ability that I think we have seen in Standard for a long while. Doomguy acts as a big-ass, evasive fatty that helps to fix your draws while filling your graveyard, is hard-castable, Isareth whip-backable, and Lazav copyable all at 5 mana. No more words are needed on this card. The next payoff we have is the 7 mana 7/7 Nezahal the Primal Tide. Now, this big boy is not going to come back off of Isareth or Lazav often, or be hardcasted often, but those possibilities are not out of the question. Mostly, this water dinosaur is going to find himself coming back off of the back of a Concoct or an Eldest Reborn. So, why Nezahal? First, let's take a look at the most important feature of this card, that being this thing's art. Look at this. Look at this little guy right here. He is absolutely fucked. This card's art is incredibly badass, and I am ashamed that I do not own a playmat with this art on it yet. But onto the actual text box of the card. Nezahal has 4 lines of text. 3 of them are useful. I have never been anywhere near 7 cards in hand when this has hit the board, so the second line is mostly useless here. So line number 1, it can't be countered. I don't think I need to talk about why that is good, so I'm not going to. Line number 3, we get to draw cards when our opponent casts non-creature spells. This is another thing that I feel like I don't need to talk about, so I'm not going to. But line number 4 I'm going to talk about. Though I have not activated this ability often at all, the ability to protect your big fatty while also throwing more fatties from your hand into the graveyard is a good trait to possess, especially in a Reanimator deck like this one. So all in all, Nezahal functions as more of a traditional Reanimator target that also will give control a rough time for you by being uncounterable, drawing us cards when they do things, protecting itself, and also smashing their face into a pulp. Finishing up our payoffs is the Eater of Dreams himself. Dream Eater is a very good fit for this deck. Whether you hardcast it during their turn by utilizing Flash, or reanimate it during your main phase, Dream Eater will usually be enough to get the job done for you. This card functions as both removal and a pretty damn good enabler, while also being a 4/3 flyer with Flash. I think that its best quality is the ability to deal with planeswalkers and white removal enchantments, where we don't have anything else in this deck that can actually deal with these things. Now, to finish up talking about the non-land cards that we have in the deck, let's talk about the Disruption package that we are running, starting with a playset of Thought Erasure. This thing is a 2-mana Thoughtseize that acts as an enabler and doesn't even shock us in the process. Yes, I understand that Thoughtseize is a better card, and trust me, I would be running it if I could, but I cannot because we don't have it. What we do have is this, and I'm pretty goddamn satisfied with that, especially with the Surveil 1 attached to it. Next on the list is 3 copies of Ravenous Chupacabra, because Murder stapled to a 2/2 that also fits into our Reanimator game plan to blow up multiple guys with only 1 card is, as it turns out, very good. And last but certainly not least are our last 3 1-drops, Siren Storm Tamer. Initially, I was running 3 Sinister Sabotages in this slot, but they were not performing well based on the fact that the deck mostly wants to be using as much mana as possible during our turn in order to fill up the graveyard, pump out threats, and reanimate our shit. So I would rarely have a Sinister Sabotage in hand with 3 mana open during my opponent's turn. So I tried subbing in these guys, and let me tell you, they are a much better fit. This card is great for a multitude of reasons, but my favorite of these reasons is Lazav, since you can pay 2 with him out and this in your yard in order to protect your Fat Boys or your Isareths, much like this guy can do on his own. Passing the turn with only one blue open is also far easier to do than passing the turn with 3 mana and double blue open. It also gets the added bonus of being able to protect us from cards like Settle the Wreckage, and anything that is able to do that is a-okay in my book. Now that we have gone over the non-land cards, let's quickly touch on the lands. There isn't really much to say here. We run 23 lands in the deck. We run the 4 Watery Graves, the 4 Drowned Catacombs that you would expect, but we also run 2 utility lands, those being a Singleton Field of Ruin, just in case we need to blow up an Escanta or an Adanto, and the second being a Memorial to Folly. Since we dump so many creatures into our graveyard, often during the late game we have a large array of things to be able to select with this, which makes it very useful to have. So, all in all, if you are a fan of Reanimator strategies, decks, archetypes, and also enjoy just playing mid-range decks in general, this may be something that you want to give a try. As an avid mid-range and graveyard player myself, I can say that not only is this deck fairly strong, but it also has been very techy and is very fun to pilot, and I would recommend slapping it together if that playstyle is something that interests you. Well, I believe that I have covered what I came here to talk about, so let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this brew breakdown, consider liking, subscribing, and doing some shit down there that involves a bell, and checking out the brew beatdown video for this deck in order to get a feel for how it plays. I'll leave a link to that video below in the description. If you do put this list together, I would be very curious to hear what changes you make and how it plays for you in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'm out.